Hi, hello. Today we are going to talk about genres as inspiration. We'll have another session where we are going to examine the features of the adventure games and other narrative games. In this session, what we are going to do is to talk about genre, the concept, and also what is the relation between themes and style in relation to genres in games, cinemas, comic books, all these things. So today we will examine the concept of genre. We will explore the challenges that is to consider genre from a transmedia context when the genre is not only for a medium but more than one medium. It's a transmedia context. It is possible that you have already talked about game genres in game and entertainment studies. If it's the case, try to catch up with that knowledge. Try to check your references or to remember what you did in that session. Let's start with something that might be simple for you. If you would like to define genre, like for example horror, what exactly would you use to define this genre? This in a canvas. But yeah, if you think about horror games, for example, something like, for example, Resident Evil franchise, you would think about horror in different ways. You could think that horror is about the scenario where the story is taking place. Is it a haunted house? Is it a lonely environment? Is usually during the night. The nights used to be more scary. But what about the characters? You would expect horror to have some supernatural creatures, some kind of scary elements, you know, whether they are vampires or werewolves or hosts or whatever. So, zombies, of course, always zombies. But the thing is, what it is what defines horror. Sometimes the horror element can be also a marketing element. That was the case of Roar. This movie wasn't intended to be horror, but the special conditions of the history of the filming of this film make the film footage to be kind of horror because it depicts real animals having attacking for real different members of the staff. So it is really something that become horror, but it wasn't intended to be at the beginning. Genres can be defined in many ways, but I think the most important definition is to think in genres as a description of an anticipated pleasure. So you know that if you go to see a movie by Jennifer Lopez, especially the movies she did some years ago, you might know exactly what is going to happen. If you see this poster, you can imagine what's the movie about. You can imagine that there is a girl that wants, to find a male, a boy, and in this kind of a story, usually there is a happy ending and all these things. So genres are usually prescriptive. They are telling the other filmmakers, if you want to do a successful movie, you have to do this way. Okay, so this is the way it works when you create formulas. If a foreigner arrives at town, it's usually a western, but it doesn't mean you cannot use that formula in other contexts, in other genres. What about audience? If you don't want to do a movie, genres is also just a label. It's a label that helps us to identify and to interpret a movie. So that is what we call interpretative role. Genres help us to analyze the product. So themes and formulas. Think about genre as amazing group of a collection of formulas. So these are narrative conventions, like for example, typical characters, typical plots, typical events, okay, and also spatial settings, okay. So if you see a planet, you would think of if it's a lonely planet, it could be either horror, or it could be science fiction, all these things, no. So this is what we call about topics when we select these different topics of different genres, and they are usually common images, okay, but also common conventions in terms of filming shots or music, okay. All these elements are narrative, but at the same time they are stylistic. They are telling us how the products are usually. You can understand genre in a transmedia way as well. You can think of genre as a label that it's associated to different media. So, for example, a film that is about superheroes usually will have a poster that is associated to the genres of adventure or superheroes. The tagline would mention elements like "This is an unlikely hero," or "This is the hero we need," or the any other sentence that is going to refer to the genre as well. So all these elements are working in the same direction. So that is understanding genre in a transmedia way, and if you want, also in a marketing way. One of the most common criticism against genre is the way that criticism, the experts in cultural products, are usually defining genres. They tend to create a genre after selecting a group of movies. So, for example, if now there are many movies of, for example, superheroes, they would say, okay, all superheroes movies, after selecting this group, are going to have these features. This is what we call an a prioristic approach, and this is not very scientific because we select the group before defining the properties of them. So we can always discard the group of text that doesn't match. Okay, so for example, if we define a superhero genre as a good guy fighting evil guys, and then there is a movie that presents a guy who is not exactly a good person, then what happens with the genre? We decided maybe that movie is not part of the genre. This is one of the problems of the theory. What it is also another common form of criticism is that you can always create an alternative, and you can always say, well, this is a superhero movie, but this is a superhero movie with an anti-hero. Okay, so this is what we call the problem of the genre game. Genre game has no end. You can always create subtypes and new kinds of genre to match your definitions. So that way, it is also kind of cheating, and it's not very scientific. Another problem with genre theory is to speak of genre in terms of transmedia. We have talked before about marketing approaches, for example. But the thing is, if you think about comic book superheroes, obviously it's not the same in movies that in comic books. It would be much better to talk always about a specific media and a specific media or medium. So what I would suggest in this module is to work always with a very specific group of text. So for example, if you refer to adventure, I would like you to refer to either novels or movies or comic books or video games or whatever, but try to be as specific as you can. Just to make this more complicated, when you talk about genre, you can think in terms of hybridization. Originally, when we talk about literature, there were not that many genres. There would be drama, there would be tragedy, and all this, but then started to be mixtures like melodrama or tragic comedy. These become much more complicated than later with the years and created these novels like feature a young guy who is becoming an adult or different adaptations of different genres depending on the country. Okay, when you move to film studies, you have the same problem. Thriller, romantic comedy, western, or science fiction might be also different when you make a mixture between them or when you translate them from one national environment, national market, and a national cinema, I mean, to another. So, for example, you might have spaghetti western, which is the Italian version of the western, or you might have the Bollywood films, which in many aspects is an adaptation of the classical Hollywood musical. Check, for example, some of the YouTube links I provide here in this presentation. When we examine the horror tradition in cinema, you usually present the monster little by little. You usually hide the monster from the trailer. You don't want to show the monsters until the movie has advanced very much into the story. That has been traditionally like that because maybe some technological limitations in the past, or maybe to create a much more sense of horror or thrilling, or transmit better these feelings. That hasn't have to be like that always. If you go to other takes in the tradition of the horror, like for example The Host, this Korean movie, you can see how the monster is presented at the very beginning of the story. Although this is quite personal, some people would say, well, Train to Busan is not that Korean, in the approach. It's just another regular action movie with horror elements. I don't know. It's up to you. But again, this is a question of discussion. This is a question of defining genre from the community of the audience that is watching the movie. So we commented before, no? The color of the musical is something that it refers to the classical musical, like for example Hollywood musical. The same concept is adapted by Bollywood, but the peculiarity of Indian cinema is that they create all the kinds of genre, and all of them are musical as well. So they do action movies, they do comedies, they do dramas, they do all kinds of movies with a musical element, and the color is still a very important part of the style of their movies. So, what about romantic comedy? What is the romantic comedy, or what is the romance movies? Or well, it depends again of the take, no? But it is interesting to see the take of, for example, Korean. Again, the Korean tradition usually it's very dramatic, and you can have a romantic comedy that in certain moment transform and becomes a drama, and that's part of the tradition. If you want to understand a product as a parody, it necessarily needs an understanding of the text that you are parodying. So, for example, you can see this trailer of Anna and the Apocalypse, which is a parody of movies like High School Musical and stuff like that. But unless you know what High School Musical is and what are romantic comedies, you might not understand this as a parody. So this is why we are at the end of the day talking about share images, share conventions between different members of a community audience. And a way to represent this visually has been done by Ryal in 1975 when he said genre is a shared convention between the producers, the authors, the filmmakers, the audience, that is us. I guess also the producers and authors when they are part of the audience. But when you are thinking about a specific genre, you are addressing to an audience. So the text product, the horror film, would be defined not only with the conventions of the typical horror films, the formulas, but also with the products that this audience are expecting, and with the talent or the style or the decisions of particular filmmakers. So within this triangle is where you will see the genre. Okay. So again, many other possibilities would create different genres, and all of them would be here between these different constructions. Well, today we have talked about genres. We have defined the concept from a prescriptive and normative, interpretative point of view. We have talked about formulas, and we have talked about hybridization, looking at different examples of national cinema. We have also worked about the problem of transmedia genre. I recommend you to look at the different references that I provide. So that's all for today. I hope you find this interesting. Let me know if I can provide more information about this topic if you need so. And I hope to see you soon in the lab or in the different sessions we have. Okay, take care.